My name is Scott Campbell, and I work at the United Nations Human Rights Office, where I lead our work on technology and human rights.
Scott, it's really good to see you, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us. As you already know, Denmark is a warm supporter of the work that you and the Office of the High Commissioner is doing in trying to translate how the international human rights framework apply in an increasingly digital world. A world where not only new technologies like AI, etc., but also the major tech companies are playing an increasingly powerful and influential role. You are truly a pioneer in this area and a strong ally for us also in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. I would love to just start out by asking you, if you put on the technology and human rights glasses, what are some of the main concerns and opportunities that you see arising from this corona crisis?
I appreciate the opportunity just to speak with you on this, as it's the future of the digital landscape is, of course, a subject very close to our hearts, and COVID-19 is indeed having profound impact, we think. Primarily, I think the COVID-19 crisis is really serving as an accelerator or a catalyst. And I think, primarily as a catalyst or an accelerator of the pervasiveness of digital tech in our lives and society. And I think we've seen this, whether we're school kids or working in private sector or working in government or international organizations. Life is moving online. It's moving online more quickly than ever before. And it's likely in the future our lives will remain online. And the future tech landscape, I think, is one that will be a landscape more pervasive in our lives than it is now. And so as COVID-19 catalyzes this shift, an acceleration into increased life online, it's also moving, I think, both the existing opportunities and the challenges of digital technologies, challenges that we've been facing over the last decade or two. Really, it's moving these questions into fast forward for us, and both the challenges and the opportunities that new tech have presented to us over the last years may be the same. There's now a real sense of urgency, and the urgency is real. There are very real medical emergencies that are compelling us to use technology right now to the maximum extent to save lives, to track, to trace, to develop and test medicine, to develop vaccines, to share information that can be life-saving. So while at the same time, COVID-19 is compelling us to address the many challenges that new technologies have presented us, especially regarding big data and artificial intelligence. And I think addressing those challenges will be key to avoiding backsliding on human rights and democracy around the world. So COVID-19 is accelerating, ultimately, how we consider, the questions of how technology is being designed, developed, rolled out, and governed. But it's really pushing us to consider those questions at a far more urgent pace, I think, than we have over the past years. And it's pushing us, I think, to a bit of a tipping point in terms of the bigger questions about new technologies that we often ask is, are these new techs going to ultimately save humanity and save the planet? Or are these new technologies, will these be our future demise and catalyze rollbacks of democratic life, of human rights, exacerbate inequalities, rich-poor divides? So I think a lot of the questions that we have on the table on how we use data-driven technologies are more urgent than ever. How do we protect the right to privacy while using data-driven technology to solve some of the urgent problems of the day? How do we track and trace without either creating a surveillance state or reinforcing a surveillance state? How can we combat hate speech and misinformation? Not a new problem, but a more urgent one today. How can we do that without quashing freedom of expression? And I think I mean, what strikes me, I think what strikes many at the Human Rights Office is which way this balance, tips, will depend, I think, quite a bit on how governments and how tech companies and how civil society are able to approach these questions with human rights in mind, from a human rights-based approach. And I think there's never been a more important time for designers and developers and engineers within tech companies and regulators and legislators on the government side to be looking at both the short-term impact and the long-term impact of the tech products and the policies and some of the programs that are putting into place right now. There's never been a more urgent time, I think, to apply, important time to apply the human rights lens to those initiatives. And looking at, I think, how new tech products, are being deployed today in the COVID-19 context will impact the future in the sense of looking at how tech initiatives to address COVID-19, are they legitimate, or are they actually serving another purpose, an economic purpose perhaps? Are applications and policies being designed today to capture the minimum of data required for health reasons, or are they being used much more broadly? Are people's personal identity being anonymized, being protected as we use data to solve the immediate COVID-19 crisis or respond to it? How is data being protected? How is the right to privacy being respected? Is data being deleted as we collect it for health reasons? And then the big question of how efforts today in the COVID-19 context to combat misinformation and hate speech online, how that will impact measures, policies, regulations, decree laws that are being drawn up very quickly. How will they impact freedom of expression in the long run? So I think that the outcomes are very uncertain, and there's certainly cause for concern, but there's also, I think, great cause for hope. And I think it's there's a question of convincing public health officials, government officials, tech companies that human rights and digital tech solutions to human problems go hand in hand.
There's so many articles and so many takes and so many perspectives on how technology is shaping the world and our world and society right now. If you were to sort of distill that and just sort of highlight one or two things that you're particularly focused on or worried about, what would those two things be?
Yeah, I think one is certainly data privacy, protection of data and the right to privacy. And it's so important today that we use new technologies to leverage the massive amounts of data that are out there to give our full power, I think, behind public health responses to COVID-19. And at the same time, we're highly concerned that without careful consideration of right to privacy, of protecting data, protecting people's personal information, protecting their identity, there can be very dangerous precedents set in place going forward in terms of our rights to privacy writ broad, and certainly our right to data privacy. So that's something we're looking at very closely, very concerned. So that's another area we're looking at and trying to message as actively as we can, both the UN Human Rights Office and the UN writ broad, WHO, but very proactively putting out accurate information, clear information, working with tech companies to make sure that they're also putting on different types of tools and their platforms and products to make sure that false information, that hate speech is being deprioritized, is being qualified, is being put with restrictions on it. So I think that's the other really key space we're looking at is how to tackle hate speech and misinformation.
When you look at developments right now and the landscape, are you seeing significant regional differences in the way countries and regions are approaching the same issues, or maybe in the different priorities the different regions are attaching to this?
I wouldn't say, but not necessarily by region, but there's certainly wildly different approaches. And we have seen some countries, Cambodia comes to mind, Hungary comes to mind, where governments are putting into place very restrictive measures that involve freedom of expression, freedom of participation and assembly, that could well be there for the long run. And they're both in the digital space and the offline space. And we're seeing other countries. I had a very interesting call yesterday with mayors and deputy mayors of many cities around the world. There's a cities coalition for digital rights that's been very active in seeing how to leverage digital technologies to make cities safer, smarter, more efficient. And many cities are carefully considering how they're choosing different apps to disseminate and share amongst their populations to make sure that information related to COVID-19 is being shared digitally as efficiently and effectively as possible, and reducing public health risk, while at the same time a lot of care being taken in terms of respecting people's right to privacy, to making sure that data is anonymized, that personally identifiable information is never shared, that data is retained for a minimum amount of time and then deleted. But we're seeing very, very different responses from different countries, different cities around the world. I think many are struggling, and I think very much the public health responses and how digital tech is being used is often also reflects the political context of a particular country or city.
Over the last couple of years, I think it's fair to say that the tech industry has received its share of criticism, often for good reason, both from politicians and decision makers, but also from the broader public. Some might say that the COVID-19 situation is a window of opportunity for the same tech companies to engage proactively and create collective good and really do good for humanity, which is, by the way, often the sign that you see over the door when you enter the headquarters. Would you agree with that assessment, that right now there's a window of opportunity to repair some of the damaged image that the companies have had over the last couple of years? And secondly, if you were the sort of chief advisor to the Mark Zuckerbergs or the Sundar Pichais or the other CEOs of the large tech companies out there, what would you advise them to be particularly careful about right now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think clearly many of the major tech companies have seen COVID-19 as an opportunity to assist in addressing the problem, and as you say, perhaps to try to repair some damages done in the past. I think a good example there might be Facebook, which is a company with whom we work very closely. We have very frank, I think very constructive, very cordial relationships with Facebook. As the United Nations, we've been often very critical of Facebook and some of their policies, in particular in Myanmar and other places around the world where Facebook has been manipulated to incite violence. And today we've seen them, just as one example, I think, take a very positive step, one among many that we've seen by tech companies. But we've seen a very careful policy response developed in regard to misinformation. And Facebook is being very careful in saying that they will not necessarily remove misinformation, but will deprioritize it, will flag it, we'll put notices on it, tag it, deprioritize it. So being careful not to repress speech, but being also very careful in contributing to making sure that false information, dangerous information related to COVID-19 is not circulating. So I think there's certainly a number of philanthropic opportunities that we've seen the big companies making. Salesforce, Facebook, Google, and others have been, I think, very generous in providing a lot of financial assistance to different communities, to employees, to public health efforts. But we're also seeing some thought, as I just mentioned, that example, being put into how a tech company can respond to some of the online challenges related to COVID-19. My advice, to tech company C-level executives would be to keep human rights considerations central into decision making, whether it's deciding on how a new product is being designed, how it's being developed, how it's being rolled out and tested, and how it's being monitored. Thinking about the potential benefits and ways that human rights can be advanced and fulfilled in putting a product or a policy into place. And on the other hand, what are the potential negative impacts? What's the potential adverse effect of having a policy or a product put into place? And I think today in the COVID-19 crisis, that fundamental question of how does our policy or our product impact on human rights is key and should be central to decision making for the business community.
Always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you, Scott.
Not always great news that we have in our office, but
very rarely, but always interesting.